or like the other speakers as well. So I'm going to, voy a decir todo otra vez para que pueda ser interpretado. Bienvenidas todas a este webinar que estamos realizando.
Welcome everyone to this webinar that we're realizing as part of the campaign against the fear of Expodefensa in Colombia. Today we're going to have 3 panelists that will tell us a little bit of how is the relationship of Colombia with other countries about arms commerce, and we have a Colombian perspective today as well. So today we have interpretation. In that way, if you need it when someone is speaking in a different language, you can use it. So I would like to give the word to Oscar, who is a part of the organization Anti-Mili, who is a people collective that develops activism in 2 divisions, one in solidarity with Palestine, and the other one anti-Islamism in Colombia. So these 2 lines are the ones that inspired the name. Anti-Mili is an abbreviation of anti-militarist. Oscar is a participant of this collective, so I would like to give you the word. Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone to attend this invitation, and also to our panelists that join us today. For several years now in Colombia, we're worried first for the appearance and now for the consolidation of the industrial war complex that is amazingly unknown, given that obviously it doesn't have any popularity to promote it into the country, even though it's very popular to promote in the rest of the world and promote it to the ones that use this war complex. The reason that we're reunited has a lot to do with that, because from 209, that war complex from Colombia has been using a warfare in Colombia to accomplish exportation and improve commerce from these companies abroad. And it's very relevant to talk about these companies and see in Aaron's case and Canada case how they are importing war technology to Colombia, but it's little spoken on how Colombia is exporting this equipment. So it's worthy to visibilize. So first we have to identify when we speak about war complex in Colombia what we mean. Basically in Colombia there are a couple of companies, private companies and public companies, but we are very interested in identifying public companies, which are 4 companies that gather around something that has been known as into the defense ministry as the corporate defense. The war Indumil is the most ancient war company in Colombia. I will give you a little presentation. I want to show you a catalog that is a current catalog from 2023 from Indumil, because it's worth speaking, having this catalog in hand to talk about who is this industry. A little while ago, 1994, these guns used in war in Colombia were produced outside, but in 1994, Indumil purchased the Gali patent, and now it's produced in Colombia, and it has a very wide exporting. These galiles that you're seeing in the catalog today are not just being produced to Colombian or for military forces, but they are being exported to places like Guatemala. Even it's a paradox, if you'd like to. This arm that is Israeli today, Colombians are making these arms that are not no longer produced in Israel and exported to Israel. So it's a consequence of the consolidation of the war conflict. Companies, arms that are being used in Israel have some parts produced in Colombia. This Indumil is not the only company, even though it's the most profitable company in exportations. Colombia may have income from
muy importantes, alrededor de 75.000 millones de pesos, especialmente porque, y quiero mostrarles esta segunda imagen, porque
I want to show you this next image because Indumil is not only producing arms, it's producing explosives as well. They're used for mining. This is a very important exporting. Guyana exports Indumil explosives, and as you can see here, Indumil is not a casualty that is participating fairs like in the United Emirates, because in this photo they are posing it next to bombs that the UA are exporting to bomb civil population in the war that they are having today in Yemen. I want to leave it there, even though we could talk much more about Indumil, because I want to pass to another actor. This other company, I'm showing you the catalog as well, is a company called, this is the company from the state that is in charge of transportation and guns to use in the sea. Today, Tecmar is exporting all of these ships, dukes, amphibious, coast guards, exporting to Panama, Antigua, Barbuda, United Kingdom, Puerto Rico, and others. So we're talking that before it was very little, almost inexistent for this naval. So they had to import from United States, England, and other places, but Colombia's conflict has made the way that Colombia articulates around the armed commerce what's important, and there are two sectors that we're articulating in the commerce that are not just the classic ways, which were minimal, but I want to start showing you this little video that I will be speaking at the same time about. The third company, war company in Colombia, is called Coloptec. This is a company whose name is about high technology for defense. This company is generating new development, new technological development in war and security. We're seeing right now images about a simulator that is called Gecko. This is a simulator used by the armed forces in Colombia that now is being sold internationally. It's the case a couple of years ago for a company that exported this to Mexico, and this is basically for private surveillance companies and any army to train their shooters in the process of training for war and care according to them. So the war Colombian complex is not just in the classic sectors, if you want to say it in a way, but also I want to close this participation talking to you about the last company, which is Corporation of Aeronautical Colombian Industry. And I'm going to use YouTube right now and try to see one of the last developments about this company, which is a drone. Something that you will think is not very local development for a company, quotes, third world and industrialization country, but Colombia is producing drones that are good for vigilance and for air war. So this drone that you're seeing right now is a drone called Coel. This has been developed by this company especially and starting now the commerce in places close to like bellies. And also I would like to stop this presentation and close this first presentation talking about how it's very important to identify the commercial relationships of war that maintained with Colombia, as I have shown in these 4 cases, are not just importing. This is fundamental. Colombia is going through a time that closing some of the conflicts that we have inside, because it has not been won. The closing of these conflicts has made the country to quote use this learning from foreign and Israel's transference technological and US technological transfer, use it to consolidate industry that will not just give the internal conflict in Colombia, but it's also giving armament to other countries, like for example, Galil Arms to Guatemala, who is going through people has been repressed by police and the army and the arms that they have, we can say that have been produced in Colombia. So the complexity of the industry in Colombia has been, I would leave it there to use this time and then have some questions. Okay, thank you so much, Oscar, for this guide that you show us from Colombia, which is not just a country that is receiving importation or have business into inwards, but is also positioning itself as an external commerce. So I will have the time to let you know about Expodefensa, which is a fair that will have an 8th edition. It's the second biggest arms fair in Latin America. More than 20 countries gather to sell and expose different machines and technology which are used for violence and repression. In this way, this webinar says for people that are just joining, this is part of the campaign that we are realizing against the Expodefensa fair, which is 5 to 7 of December, saying and highlighting that arms fairs are where war began, and it's one of the places that we need to stop it. Right now, I want to give the word to Eitay. I will share his biography in a minute. He's a lawyer and human rights activist. He represents Palestinians and human rights and human activists in Palestine and human rights violations about Israel colonists, and he works to stop defense Israeli defense exportations and other regiments that are using all of these guns to violate human rights and war crimes and human crimes. He's going to do his presentation in English. So who needs to interpret in Spanish, please take Spanish channel to hear his presentation.
Hello to all. Thank you very much, Oscar, and the rest of the organization that are participating in that, and also all of my colleagues here in the panel. I will focus on the story of Colombia, even though I've been working, I think, on most Latin America, but in many other countries around the world. Concerning Colombia, I did an investigation in which I read the documents in the Israeli archive. I read about 50,000 pages of telegrams, and I wrote an article that you can find it in the internet in English. And there is these telegrams that I read are between the year 1950 until the 90s. So it's a long period. The reason that we don't have further telegrams is because not enough years passed and they are still secret. But I think these telegrams are really important to understand the Israel and Colombia relationship, because they show us patterns of the relationship. And also, one of the things that I learned from my investigation all over the world is that when there's a pattern that is established in the relationship of Israel and another country, it repeats again and again. So maybe the technology developed with the years, but the concept, the patterns are repeating. So for example, in the case of Colombia, if in the mid-80s, Israel sold Colombia quite simple plane for surveillance that were used to do surveillance around Colombia. So we know that later about 20 years later, Israel sold Colombia very developed drones that could also shoot missiles. Oscar mentioned the issue of the Galil rifles. So Israel sold directly to Guatemala during the civil war and the genocide in the 70s, 80s, Galil rifles. And now there are new models of Galil rifles that are getting to Guatemala from Colombia, but Israel is also selling more advanced models like Tavor rifles to Guatemala. Returning to the story of Colombia, until year 1980, there was no military relationship between Israel and Colombia. I was surprised to find it. Maybe the telegrams are wrong, but this is what they show, because the US prohibited Colombia to make an arms deal and training with Israel. What happened is that in the year 1980, there was the incident of the hostages in the Dominican Republic embassy in Bogotá, in which also the Israeli ambassador was held as a hostage. And we don't know why. Since then, the military relationship started. And what we see is that Israel became a very important of Colombia in the issue of what was defined by both Israel and Colombia as the fight against terror. By the mid-80s, in year 86, Colombia was the biggest client of Israel in all Latin America. And the issue of why this happened, we don't know. Like why Israel took some of the parts of the job of the US, we don't know why it happened. But from the telegram, we see it was a business. So Colombia sold Israel coal and oil. And this way, Colombia paid for some of the weapons that it bought, including aircrafts and Galil rifles, and also training. What was interesting also to see is that there were Israeli officials that gave advice to the Colombian government in how to fight terror. And the same official, after they finished their job in the public service in Israel, they returned to Colombia as private advisors. So we see that some of the Israelis that are working in Colombia have been doing it for many years. What's also interesting is that by reading all these telegrams, it's quite clear that the Israeli authorities knew exactly what is happening in Colombia, all the human rights violation. They knew about the death squad. They knew that they are arming military forces and others that are operating death squad in Colombia. They knew that they even give training in Israel to Colombian officers that were involved in a death squad, and they just didn't care. The embassy in Bogotá kept reporting about all the deaths, who was involved, but they just didn't care. I couldn't find evidence about their knowledge concerning Yair Klein, but because all the documents of the Mossad are still close to the public, maybe they were aware, but at least the Israeli embassy, the Israeli foreign ministry, is not mentioning him. But the story of Yair Klein is interesting because Israel tried to say, okay, he worked without our permission. But what the telegram show is that Israel didn't care what happens with all the military equipment and training that was given with permission. They didn't care that it was used for human rights violation and for killing politicians and civilians. And this is a pattern that I think continue until nowadays. And this is also something important to say, because now it seems like there's a bit of fight between the Colombian president and the Israeli government. The Israeli government say, okay, we are not going to sell defense export, but they are not saying we are going to stop the training. They are not saying we are stopping the advice against terror. And this is also important lesson, that if the Colombian government is not changing all these concepts of fight against terror, that to see civilian movements and resistance group in Colombia for justice as terror groups. So it doesn't matter if you have a right-wing president or a left-wing. We saw the same in Brazil, that Lula didn't fix the establishment, and then the establishment swallowed up. And now I think he's doing the same mistake. Because Lula, even though he was leftist, he continued all the arms deal as usual with Israel and continue all these concepts of repression. And the same goes now in Colombia. So I think what we also saw in this Oscar explained is how things are being more sophisticated, because even though Israel sold the patent to the Colombian company, Israel still has a say where the weapons are going. And this is really important, because what happens is that Colombia is helping Israel to take off responsibility where the Galil rifles are going. And Belgium did the same in the past with the production of Uzi machine guns. So I think I suggest anybody that wants, you can find my full article in the internet. And I think maybe from seeing the past, you could understand a lot of things of what happening now, because history is repeated. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Eitay, por tu presentación. Vamos a
Thank
dar
you, Eitay, for your presentation. We're going to give you a little time to be writing if you have any questions for Oscar and for Eitay. But thinking of the presentation that you just did, I think that it's not just that these relations between Colombia and Israel are new or recent, but more than a long time ago, and not just you're not commercing with anything but their guns, and also training. That is something that right now we can ignore, or we're not highlighting in this kind of relationships between countries, but I think it's a very important point to highlight because we hadn't mentioned that, and I think it's really important to say it. Not just gun commerce, but it's also training people for the countries in other places. At the end, all this training and the guns is being used for human rights violations and repression. So, okay, where if you have questions, please, I would like to give the word to our third panelist, who is Cesar Jaramillo. He is an executive director for Aussure's project, and his interests include nuclear and emerging and conventional arms. He's in a lot of spaces giving conferences, like in New York and New Delhi University, as well in China. So today he's going to share a little bit of this panorama and gun commerce, exportation and importation in Canada and Colombia. So go ahead, Cesar. Natalia, can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much to you and to everyone for this invitation. Thank you for Oscar and Eitay for their presentations. I learned a lot as I heard, and thank you for who took the time to assist today to this conversation. I'm very pleased to be here. Yes, I'm going to be brief. I will try to be brief. Before I go to the Colombian comments, I have a few comments about the relationship between Canada and Colombia. I would like to do some general considerations about the arms commerce, some of which can be obvious for you, but anyways, I think it's important to highlight that. First, global arms commerce is a really good business, round business, lucrative business that is whole year after year, that goes beyond $100 a year. It's something exorbitant. So as a business and money gaining point of view, who have actions of these companies that produce guns, it's really attractive. So we would ask, what's the problem? It's commerce, it imposes financial activity, there's always a constant demand, and there's always someone who is willing to supply the offer. The issue is, obviously, there's a really high proportion of these business, an unacceptable portion is being used to exacerbate armed conflict and human rights violations, autocratic regimens around the world. So the issues are really evident. And right now, the information is not just evident, but undeniable. We have enough information to declare without a doubt that there is a relationship, cause and effect between guns, irresponsible transfer, and a lot of for human rights. So we have to see it from this perspective for the negative, concrete, demonstrable, and persistent negative effects, and for the military conflicts that you say in English that it's alive. And also, it's resurfacing right now in the context of conflict that we're seeing right now in Middle West, Russia and Ukraine. All of that is in guns company are really happy because they are buying really fast and for higher and higher values. The second point that I would like to do in general terms is that there is a normative frame that we should, it's not completely, but should regulate arms commerce. And it's not just about peace movements and the responsible gun owning, moral imperatives and ethical imperatives, but which are valuable, but also the law that is there clear, but is not being taken into account. National and internationally, there's a treaty about guns commerce that talks about the conditions that you can go for guns transfer. I will not go into details about the parameters, articles, and obligations, but I will talk about one central parameter, which is about risk evaluation. And from that point of view, it should be really easy. There's a risk of the guns not being used properly. I mean, used to exacerbate conflict, human rights violations, UN regimen, autocratic, and negative consequences. Transferences should not be authorized. And again, it's not because peace movements say, but it's because it's against the law. They are not heading the law because there is a way, there's a risk that they will be used for negative effects. The third point that I would like to say is that maybe this is obvious, but not all of the countries are gun producers. Countries, guns producers, if we see globally, conflict areas are not gun producing. Guns come mainly from developed countries, which are getting money from these annual and I would say exaggerated income that are killing themselves. So when someone is in an European or North American country watching CNN news and they ask themselves, how can this happen? Generally, the answer is because their own government have sent these guns to these conflict areas. Okay, so that's like globally. Now, Canada, we have tried to execute scrutiny about the decisions that Canadian government takes about gun exportation in Colombia, and the organization that I direct, because I'm Colombian, I'm very interested about Colombian impact on gun transfer in that sense. Canadian guns, so Canada has signed and ratified its treaty about gun treaty. So it has to be ruled by this risk evaluation, deliverable risk evaluation that needs to proceed for authorizations. And we have criticized a lot in Canada before gone to Colombia. They're being selling UA billions of guns. Some of them, they have developed a really inhumane war. So we have criticized that. In the case of Colombia, Canada this year, 2023, announced contract of guns highest exporting that they have had with Latin America or the Caribbean, not globally, but regionally, the most high historically valuated in $420 million for blinded vehicles. So here in Canada, we got nervous. There were precedents of exportations in 2013, 2014 to the Colombian armed forces. So here, two matters that are still in our collective movements and the peace movements and who follow these matters closely. One, false positives. If it's recognized and it's obvious historically that there has been government changes and time has passed, anyways, it's presumed that the responsibility of the false positives, at least in part, is from the Colombian army. So still, this is part of the risk evaluation. So this is seen by some to sell this amount of guns to army that have been involved in such wrong. And on the other side, it was new in Canada and other places. Of course, Colombia, everyone is familiarized with the pattern that has been seen of repression of protesters. So the evaluation, the risk evaluation of guns was not generic. So it has to be case by case, depending on the type of arms, what kind of risk it can take. So this type of blinded vehicles that are going to go to Colombia are the ones that can be illegally used for pacific protest, repression, like the ESMAD. And Colombia is a country that we all know, even if the peace effort, they have had human rights, repression, false positives issues that added, it would be reasonable or risky or reasonable risk scenario. So Canada should see that carefully to authorize these guns. And also the government, the Canadian government, with the example that I said, to the UA exportation that contributes to the issue with Yemen, they have a really smooth process. When they go into conflict, not just Canada, we see this in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in France, in Italy, etc. As much as inspired of the speaking is for the human rights and the speeches in the UN, unfortunately, it's a pattern that when they enter into conflict, money that they can gain, human rights protection is privileged from the money gaining. I will leave it there. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much, Cesar, for your presentation. Okay, there is a question in the chat that I will read in a minute, but I would like to gather what you shared that is also connected to something else that Eitay shared before, but the information and who have access to, I don't know, size, numbers, and what is being commerce is really reduced, and it's really limiting also for the organizations and his movement to access to this information. So these spaces of talking and also different campaigns that are being given to arms share, it's really important to make visible this information that you're giving. There is a global arm commerce that is not being held by a law, and Colombia Arm Fair is not the only one that is, and they are all being the same year for the reason. First was Spain, then England, then South Korea, then Colombia. So they're all happening like almost simultaneously. So this is very important to highlight because it's not just Colombia. So yes, these spaces for selling and commerce are in various places, but also what you just said, countries that have these conflicts that no one gets and are huge in human rights violation and repression usually are not countries that produce guns. This is very important to highlight because the ones that are being beneficial for these commerces are the global south and the biggest potentials that we know in that way. There's a question in the chat that says, if we have realized before a request to the government to suspend this arm fair, Cesar and Eitay said it before. Usually we would think that it's just the governments of the right that are supporting these arm fairs or this commerce, but also other governments have a very held pro-life speech, but also are supporting these commercial relationships and types of events. So with this campaign that we're doing right now, and we also have a petition for people to sign, I will get it in the chat and I hope that I can put it in the comments on the transmissions, like in Facebook. So I had it in the chat right now for you to see. It's a petition directed to the government and the Ministry of Defense to cancel these and the future versions in Colombia. So that's that initiative, and of course we're taking some other actions and activities other than this petition, precisely because people is not aware that these events exist. And in that sense, they're not even realizing the dimension of all of these arms businesses. So there's another question that Liliana makes. I don't know who wants to answer this, but okay. I'm gonna read it. It says, I understand Colombia has not ratified the Treaty of Commerce with the UN. What implications has this had? And is this a strategy for not to implement this treaty? Cesar will respond. Welcome any other comments about. You're very right, Liliana. Colombia has not ratified this treaty about arms. It's a shame. It's a minority in the region who hasn't ratified this treaty. And may I be excused, and another topic is the nuclear disarmament. There are two treaties that Colombia is missing. The first one is guns provisions, and the second one is nuclear weapons treaty, and Colombia hasn't ratified any of those. It's a task pending for the government from any side. It's clear expectations that Colombia needs to sign this treaty. We're supposed, or there needs to be an effect, but from the point of view of Canada, what matters is that Canada is a part of this weapon treaty. independently that Colombia has ratified or not. Canada has to evaluate that risk when they're going to Colombia, even if the destinatory is part of not of the treaty. And second, there's the Vienna Convention treaty, and Colombia signed the treaty. You can be signed and then ratify the treaty, like the wedding ring after, to use an analogy. So there's an expectation anywhere, even if they hadn't ratified, because they signed, there's an expectation that you need to accomplish the treaty.
Muchas gracias, vale. Hay también otra pregunta.
Thank you so
Dice,
much.
¿quién
There's
se
another
quiere
question. I don't
responder?
know who wants to answer it also as well if you have
Cuando hay
information.
acuerdos de compra
So
de
when
armas,
there is
estos vienen
agreements
acompañados
to
de
buying guns,
inteligencia
are
militar,
these
de
accompanied with
dotación,
military
alianza de
intelligence?
preparación y capacitación a
These
grupos paramilitares en
evidence
Colombia.
of
No sé, Oscar, si quisieras tomar
capacitation
eso
to
o
paramilitary groups
también
in
si tienes
Colombia.
alguna información respecto a este
Cesar
tema.
or
¿Cómo
Eitay, if
se
you
hace
have
para más inteligencia
any
militar?
information about
Sí, yo quisiera
gun
responder
purchasing
a
and
parte de la pregunta
military
y
intelligence
también
training.
a
I would like to
Edwin
answer
compartirnos
the
parte
first part of the
esta
question, and I would
información
invite
de nuestra
Eitay
investigación.
as well for these
Al
results of his
menos
investigation, at least
en las relaciones con
in the
Estados
relationships
Unidos,
between
con
United
Israel,
States, Israel,
e inclusive
and
pues algo que no se
even
conoce tanto en
something
los
that is
inicios
not
de
well
las
known in
relaciones
the starts of the
militares
relationship,
institucionales con
military
Turquía o con India, que son lugares con los cuales
relationships
Colombia
with
está
Turkey
empezando
and
también a
India,
tener
that Colombia is starting to have
acuerdos marco
agreements
o está por lo menos negociándolos.
or at least
Con Estados Unidos y
negotiating.
con Israel ya tienen
With the
unos
United
acuerdos
States
marco
and
establecidos.
Israel, they have
Esos acuerdos
agreements
marco son
established.
acuerdos de colaboración.
These
No
agreements are
solamente
collaboration
es para
agreements,
facilitar el
not just
intercambio y
for
comercio de armas en la guerra, sino
weapon commerce
también
and war, but also
viene con todo el componente
it
de
comes with
entrenamiento y
all of the
transferencia
training and
tecnológica. Eso es clave, por
technological
ejemplo,
transfer.
inclusive en la
That's
relación
important
con Israel. De
in
pronto,
the relationship with Israel.
sabe algo más. Y yo
Maybe
quisiera,
Itay knows more. I would
para
like
cerrar mi
to
intervención
close
también,
my intervention as
hacer
well
énfasis en algo que
to
nos decía ahorita
highlight
Natalia,
something
y
that
es que
Natalia was saying
voy a
before.
compartir un momento otra vez
I
la
will
pantalla.
share a little bit.
En Colombia estamos teniendo,
In Colombia,
no se ha parado el proceso de compras de
we
guerra,
haven't
y
stopped
a principios de este año
shopping
tenemos
for war.
una serie de compras que son muy
And for this year, we have a lot of
importantes
purchases
tener
that are very
presente.
significant
El
to
militarismo
keep in
todavía
mind.
está ahí rampante.
Militarism
Solamente
is
para señalar, por ejemplo, que
very
a industrias
important right
colombianas, el
now.
Estado
Colombian
le
industries,
compró
the
a
state
principios de año 5 vehículos de transporte,
bought
4 vehículos tácticos para
5
esta industria de guerra de la
transportation
que
and
hablaba
4
previamente.
tactical
Y
vehicles
también
from
a
this
industrias de
war
guerra
industry that we
estadounidense,
were
es decir,
talking about,
además de lo que nos estaba
and
compartiendo César,
also about what Cesar
Estados
was
Unidos
sharing
se le está
before. United
comprando
States
aviones de
is
entrenamiento, se le
being
está comprando drones
purchased
por unos montos
drones
muy
and
altos en
training
términos de
planes
ya
for
esto
really
y
high amounts.
y finalmente, y ahí sí
And
como
this
para
is from
pasarle
Petro.
el testigo, como para
And right
pasarle la
now,
valla a Itay, con
to give
Israel
the
es
word
una
to
cosa
Itay, with Israel,
desafortunada,
it's
porque mire,
really
mientras que a
unfortunate
principios
because
de año,
look
finales del
at
anterior y principios
first
de
of
este
the
año, se
year
anunció
and
compras de
last of
sistemas
the
de
year and
desarrollo
first
de
of this
buses,
one,
del
they have
mantenimiento de los
purchased
Zafir viejos, de tecnología electrónica,
all
etcétera. Y
Kafirs,
ahorita por lo menos es
electronic
muy importante
technology,
porque acaba
etc. And it's very
de
important
suceder de facto algo
that
que algunas organizaciones
right now
criollas
just
pidieron porque
happened.
creemos que es
Some
fundamental, y es el
organizations
embargo militar
have
a
asked
Israel, primero
to,
en solidaridad con las atrocidades, pues, no, para
in
denunciar las
solidarity
atrocidades
with the atrocities and
palestinas,
to
pero
denounce
también
the
para
atrocities with the
poder
Palestinian people,
sobrevivir en este
but
país, porque es que no
also
tiene
to
sentido
survive
que
in this
no estemos
country
importando
to
armas
take the
incluso
money
ante la
away from
intervención, por
Israel
ejemplo,
army.
Israel
It
vende
makes no sense to
sistemas de
give
cibervigilancia como el Predator, que está funcionando
money.
hoy día en Colombia.
Israel is
Y digo que
purchasing
funciona de
Predator
facto embargo militar
military
porque después del
operational
atentado
systems that
el
works
pasado
well in
9 de
Colombia.
abril,
And I see
saben ustedes,
after what happened with the
el sistema
Israeli
de exteriores israelí
embassy,
decidió que iba a frenar las
exterior
exportaciones de
system
seguridad a Colombia.
decided
Para
that they were
nosotros eso
going
fue,
to
es curioso, una alegría
stop.
saber que se iban a
It
frenar,
was a
pero el
joy
problema es que nos
to
preocupa
know that
mucho
they
que
were
el
going to
gobierno
stop
de Petro en este
sending
momento no
surveillance,
asuma que es él quien tiene que
but
frenar
President Petro needs to be the one that needs to stop the surveillance commerce with the with the police and with the army, which are the things being purchased from Israel, and stop buying from them. I just wanted to give those two elements. Okay. Thank you. Eitay, I don't know if you want to say something about this military intelligence.
So in many countries, we don't have evidence, but in the case of Colombia, I did find a telegram from year 88, in which it was written that officers from Colombia came to Israel, including the head of the unit that was responsible about the disappearance and killing in the incident of the hostage taken in the Supreme Court in Colombia in mid-80s. So they came to Israel for instruction in how to fight terror, how Israel deal with terror. And also the advisor that came to Colombia were the former head of the Mossad. So it proves that Israel has a very close relationship with Colombia. It's not a relationship that Israel have in every country in the world. It means that Israel trusts Colombia not only to sell weapons, but also to sell sophisticated technologies, and also knowledge of how to use these technologies and how to use it in the war. And as we all know, the problem in Colombia that for almost all the government, the people of Colombia are terrorists. So they are fighting the people of Colombia. And the Israeli government, as I say, also know it, that there are farmers and politicians that are killed, but still they send people with a very unique knowledge of intelligence to share it. Not only to share the intelligence itself, but also how to collect intelligence, how to investigate the people, how to do a spying on people in Colombia. And I'm sure that it's still going on until today, because what we know about Israel is that once the barrier is crossed, so it continues on and on and on.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, veo dos
Okay,
preguntas.
thank you very much. I see two more questions in the chat. Let's say that this conversation is planned for an hour. Nevertheless, we know that this is a very important topic that has very questions, because the information available is very limited. And if you have a question about the change of government right now, has not advanced in the military politics. So right now we have that space, and there is a question about chemical weapons and even warfares are being commercialized. If there is exportation about these kinds of weapons. Oscar answered that he doesn't have knowledge about this precise information, but it's worthy to investigate when we have the list of expositors that will be this year and everything. So right now I have the question if the government change has implied a change of political military in Colombia. Thank you, Natalia. And thank you, Solangela, for the question. Yes, but I would like to refer to something in that sense Eitay and Oscar said. Unfortunately, the political wave right now has less impact than one would think. There is the force of that weapon commerce that one would think maybe easily it's more right or more conservative, more exportative, or if they're more left, they're less involved, and it's not always in that way. Many times those contracts are for many, many years. It goes government on government and nothing changes in that way. So in that point of view, In Colombia's case, one would think in one of these governments from the historical fact, there would be less tendency. I don't know all of the details, but I can say if Colombia is still selling arms to the UA, that's something that must be remembered to the government, especially now that we're lamenting so much um, with all of the reason for bombing in Gaza and Palestine. Colombia is um, taking a part in Yemen, so for coherence, it's very good. In Canada, I imagine you're familiarized with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister that arrived to the government with a lot of charisma and very well received as a great liberalist. And this contract, when weapon contracts are the same that his predecessor that was conservative left, he was more hated and rejected for the way that he was involved with the military and weapon exportation, and liberals are doing the exact same. So sometimes it's even harder than the political waves.
Yo quisiera complementar
I would like to complement
lo que es la pregunta con dos
the
cosas
question with
para
two
también
things.
meternos
Also,
en
to
Expodefensa.
get
Yo
into
quiero que por
Expo
favor
Defense,
piden lo que
I
van a
would
ver
like
en este
you
momento.
not to forget what you're
Expodefensa
going
está
to
con
see
el sello
in
de
this moment is that
Colombia
Expo
izquierda,
Defense
Colombia
is with
derecha. Entonces,
the
puede que la
seal of
doctrina de
Colombia
seguridad del
life
Estado esté
potent.
cambiando en algunas cosas y tampoco puede decirse
Maybe
que
the
no es
state
así,
is changing in
¿sí?
some things,
Pero al mismo tiempo hay lugares
but
de
at
la
the same
doctrina de
time, there are
seguridad,
places in the
especialmente frente al
security
complejo
doctrine,
industrial de guerra y
especially
especialmente
in
frente al
the
comercio,
war industry
que no
complex
están,
and commerce, that are not
están
changing. They
diversificándose.
are
Y esa es por una razón
diversifying
que
and
la otra cosa, la
transforming,
última reflexión,
which is
esta
the
semana,
last
a ver si
thought
alcanzan ustedes a ver
for this
aquí,
year.
esta
Let's
semana
see if you
nos
can
dimos
see
cuenta
here.
que la página de Expo Defensa
This
tenía
week, we saw that Expo
estos
Defense
nuevos
had
anuncios. Y
this new
esta nueva Expo
announcement,
Defensa va a
and is
traer
that this year
otras formas
Expo Defense will have other
lógicas de,
ways,
como ellos llaman, seguridad y defensa.
as
Y eso
they call
significa que nosotros
defense
nos hacemos
security, and this
responsables
means
del
we're
pasado en Estados
getting
Unidos,
closer
ya
to
mismo
what
va a pasar
was
en Europa,
happening in the
en el
United
sector
States
de,
and
ellos
Europe,
llaman
and
de
is that
defensa, que realmente es de
as
guerra y
they
de
call,
muerte. Entonces
defense
empieza a hablar de el
sector that
militarismo frente a la
actually is
respuesta
war and death.
a crisis múltiples, el
They're talking
militarismo
about
frente a
militarism, about
protección de recursos
crisis,
naturales, el
natural
militarismo
protection,
frente a protección de
militarism
ciudadanos. Y
for
el gobierno de
citizens
Petro ya en
protection.
otras
And the
ocasiones
Petrus
sí que
government
se ha manifestado y
in
dicho
other questions has
queremos
said,
que
we
Indomiel
want to,
construya
in the
puentes en
mill, to
lugares
build
donde haya
bridges in
necesidad.
places
Y la gran
that
pregunta que
that
nos
are
genera
needed.
eso, y
And
esto
the
es
big
un caso de
question
muchísimos, es por
is
qué las industrias de guerra
why
tienen que seguir
war industries
reemplazando
have
a las
to be
industrias civiles
replacing
en cosas en
civil
las que las industrias de
industries
guerra
in
tienen que
things.
participar en la
Why
resolución de
war
problemas de crisis múltiples. ¿Por
industries
qué las
have
industrias
to
de guerra
be
tienen que participar dentro de la
a
solución del
part
problema climático?
of the solution of
Esto
the
no es más
climate
sino lo que venimos
change
denunciando hace mucho
problem?
tiempo,
This is
lavado
nothing but what we have
lavado del militarismo con el
um,
medio ambiente, lavado del militarismo con los desastres ambientales y
laundry
con las
of the
crisis
militarism with
como el COVID-19 que lo vimos, como el
crises like
COVID-19 provocó
COVID-19.
una
We saw it how
remilitarización
COVID-19
de los países,
um,
justificada
made our
con la nuclear. Entonces,
militarism
si quiero dejar
justified
esta
by
reflexión
sickness
que,
in
claro
countries.
que hay
So I
un
want to
cambio de
leave this
doctrina, no se puede negar, no podemos
thought.
decir
Of
que no,
course, there is a
pero no es
change
un cambio de doctrina en todos los sentidos.
in teachings, but not in every way.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Oscar.
Okay, thank you, Oscar.
Entonces, bueno, yo
So,
empezaría a darle
okay,
cierre
I
a este
will
webinar, esta
start
conversación.
closing this webinar,
Básicamente,
this
la misión
conversation. As
como
I told you,
de la campaña
this
que
is a
estamos
part of the
realizando varias
campaign that we're
organizaciones en Colombia,
making a lot of organizations
la
in
Internacional
Colombia,
Resistentes a la Guerra, World Beyond War,
international
Witness for
war
Democracy,
resistance, war beyond war,
Observadores de Conciencia, el Observatorio de Militarismo,
militarism
precisamente la Junta en
observatory,
contra de la guerra.
precisely
Entonces
against
comparto ese documento,
warfare.
petición que
I
estamos como
shared
compartiendo
the
para que
petition
la compartan
that we're
también dentro de
sharing
sus
for you
redes
to
y personas
share
que pues estén
between your
interesadas.
networks and
Y
people that
nuevamente,
are interested.
pues agradecer
And
a
again,
César,
thanks
Oscar
to
y a todas
Itai,
las personas pues que se conectaron a esta
Oscar and
conversación
Cesar,
y
and
gracias a
everyone
su
who joined this
invitación.
conversation.
Y
It's the
más
beginning.
adelante en noviembre vamos a
And
tener como
further
otra
in
sesión
November, we're
más
going to
detallada,
have another conversation
pero
on
esta
this
vez
topic.
enfocado como a
But
las
right now,
experiencias
focused on the resistances and actions on military groups, not just to stay with the panorama that is very hard and heartbroken, but also what are the implications and the actions taken against these arms fairs. We also invite you to join in the moment when everything is organized. And again, just thank you for listening and for the transmissions and here at Zoom. And thank you so much.
Gracias a ti, Natalia.
Thanks to you, Natalia, and for everyone who joined.
Gracias, Nata.
Thank you, Nata.